Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I am back covering for Alex today. We miss her, but I also get the immense pleasure of getting to be on this live stream with Jacky, one of our renowned MuleSoft ambassadors. I feel he is one who needs no introduction. From all of his content you've seen across blogs, YouTube, events, Twitch streams. So thank you so much, Jacky, for joining me this morning. And with that, I'm going to let you take it over and take over the stream for the next hour.
Yeah, thanks, Sabrina. Thank you so much. I will just present my screen. Okay. So, guys, I hope you can see my screen. Okay. Okay. So, I will just start with the session. I will just introduce myself. So, my name is Jitendra Bafna, and like I have overall 16 plus years of experience in the integration and the APIs technology. And I'm one of the MuleSoft ambassador, and also I am a MuleSoft meetup leaders and MuleSoft speaker. I have almost written almost published more than 300 videos and a lot of blogs articles. Yeah. So in today's session, we will going to discuss about what are the capabilities provided by CloudHub 2.0. So we will be talking about shared space, private space, like how to create a private space in any point platform, basically, right? So first, if you're aware in CloudHub 1.0, like whenever we want to create a single tenant, or whenever we want to deploy the application in the private mode, basically, so we are using the Anypoint Virtual Private Cloud, which is known as a Anypoint VPC. But later in the CloudHub 2.0, Anypoint VPC has been renamed as a private space, which provide more much features than Anypoint VPC. So we will going to talk about that. We will going to have a one demonstration. Okay. So let me do one thing before I start with the actual session. What I will do, I will create a private space, because once I will create a private space, it will take approximately 30 minutes, basically. So so first I will start with the private space. Okay. So for creating the private space, like you can go to the runtime manager and you can select your environment, and here you will see something called private space, and simply here you will see a blue button. You can simply create on a private space, and you can give the name to the private space like mule or something like mule sandbox, a private space, right? So that's a private space. So it has created a private space. So once you have created the private space, I have to create a private network. So for creating the private network, I require a CIDR block. So generally MuleSoft recommended at least minimum you can give slash 22 of your CIDR block, but you can give a slash 24 also. So slash 24 provide around 256 IP addresses, whereas slash 23 will provide it 512, and slash 22 will be providing 1024, basically. And we have a maximum CID block, which is slash 16, which provide around 65,536 IP, basically. But in this case, I will just select, I will just use 192.168.0.0 slash 22, right? So I'll simply create, I will select the region. So basically here you can select the region, in which region you have to create your private or a private space. Basically always select your private space near to your data center, which is your corporate data center, or maybe your cloud infrastructure. I will simply hit on create button. So it will just create a private VPC. Sorry, it's private space. So here you can see it will take approximately 30 minutes to create a private network. So let me open the Anypoint Studio in the side also. So I want to see few demonstration with the Anypoint Studio also. I will open that also. Now let me go to C drive, Anypoint Studio. Okay. Okay, so let me start the first thing. So what is a CloudHub 2.0? So with CloudHub 2.0, you can deploy your application into the containerized environment, which is the Kubernetes base. So basically, you can deploy your application deploy your application as a container. In CloudHub 1.0, what happening when you are deploying your application? In CloudHub 1.0, it is creating a AWS EC2 instance in the backend where it is deploying, it is installing the Linux operating system. Then on the top of Linux operating system, it will deploy the Mule runtime. Then it will also set up any point monitoring agent. Then it will deploy a MuleSoft application. Like in case if you are selecting two workers, so it will create a two EC2 instance, and it will create set up the Linux operating system in both the EC2 instance. Then it will set up the anypoint monitoring agent. Like it will set up the Java runtime, and then it will set up Mule runtime, and then it will deploy the application, and it will be the load balance basically, right? But what happened in the case of CloudHub 2.0? In case of CloudHub 2.0, it doesn't create a virtual machines or EC2 instance. It create a container basically. So container is again comprised of its own operating system, Linux operating system. On the top of Linux operating system, it will set up a JVM, which is known as Java basically. Then it will also set up any point monitoring agent. Like it depends, like whether you have enabled it or you haven't enabled it. But by default, it will going to set up any point monitoring agent. On the top of that, it is deploy your MuleSoft application. So in CloudHub 1.0, we are calling a worker, whereas in CloudHub 2.0, we call as a replica, right? In CloudHub 1.0, we are calling a worker size, whereas in CloudHub 2.0, we are calling as a replica size, basically, right? So here again, when you are deploying the application, like suppose let's consider if you select your application to deploy on the two replicas, basically, right? So this means like your two replicas will be deployed across the multiple availability zone to ensure the fault tolerance architecture and the high availability architecture. In case one of the availability zone goes down, you have other availability zones available where where your replica is up and running, so your request can be served by that particular replica basically, right? So shared space is available in the 12 different regions basically, similar to the CloudHub 1.0. CloudHub 1.0 is also available in the 12 different region. In CloudHub 1.0, we have a anypoint VPC, and for network connectivity we have a anypoint VPN, we have a VPC peering, we have a AWS direct connect, and also we have a transit gateway. Whereas in the CloudHub 2.0, it doesn't support AWS direct connect and VPC peering, right? In CloudHub 2.0, we have a anypoint VPN IPsec tunneling, and we have a transit gateway basically. Now your question might be like that, if we want to connect to two VPC, what approach can be used in the CloudHub 2.0? So in CloudHub 2.0, you can set up a transit gateway between uh, two VPC or two private subnets, or two private spaces basically. That is how you can do the connectivity. Right? Any question till now? So if I can take if there's any question or anything. Yeah, I will come on that, like Prithvi, so I will going to explain everything, like so don't worry, inbound, static, IP address, everything, like I will going to discuss all thing everything about this basically, right? So like so what we will do, I will create one small application basically. So I might be having some application available. So this is my test project which is already available, right? So in this application, I have a simple HTTP listener. So basically, this is my simple HTTP listener, which is like the path is test. And if you see by default, whenever you want to deploy the application, whether it is HTTP or HTTPS, it is always 8081 port. Whereas in CloudHub 1.0, like if you want to deploy application which can be accessible publicly over the HTTP, we are using the port 8081. When it has to be accessible publicly over HTTPS, then we are using the port 8082. When it has to be accessible privately over the HTTP, we are using the port 8091, and over the HTTPS, we are using the port 8092. Here, for everything, we use the port 8081. So you can see I have configured the port 8081. It's just a small application. I will simply, I will simply import it, not import. Yeah, just a minute. I have to jar next. Sorry, I have to export it. Sorry, just a minute. Not this one. Just a minute. It's deployable project, and simply on the desktop project, I will just say finish. So let's see what happening to my anypoint, my private space. So here you can see it's still creating a private spaces basically, right? So here it's taking time. We are waiting for, we have to get a private DNS target, inbound static IP address, outbound static IP address. So I have exported my jar file. So I can go to my application, and here I can select the deploy application. Here I will say mule uh, test. I will say Twitch app. Okay. And here you will see the option like CloudHub 2.0, CloudHub hybrid, whatever environment you have. So in my case, I will just select the CloudHub 2.0. I don't have any private space created yet, so I will just select shared spaces, US East OYO, and then I have to select the file. Yeah, this is the test project file, and here you can provide a runtime version. It supports 4.3.0 and above, but it doesn't support any version below the 4.3.0. Then you have a replica size. So like there's a one of the benefit we get from the cloud of 2.0, like it provides the more granular replica size options. We have a 0.1, 0.2, 0.5, 1, 1.5, 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5, and 4. So maximum vcode you can allocate it to your application or to your replica, which is 4 vcode. Whereas in cloud of 1.0, it supports 0.1, then 0.2, directly 1, then 2, then 4, 8, 16 basically. But here we have a more granular vcore option. I will just go with the 0.1. Then we have a replica kind. So how many replica you want to deploy? If I select 2, then you can enable the clustering. Whereas cloud of 1.0 doesn't support any point clustering. Here it support clustering basically. If you are selecting more than one replica, I will just go with one. So for benefit of clustering is like you can share your VM queues, like you can share your object store within the replicas basically. Then you have a deployment model, rolling update and a recreate. So rolling update is basically provide a zero downtime deployment. With the recreate, basically what it will delete the application and redeploy it again basically. But in rolling update, the old instance of application will be there till the new instance of application gets successfully deployed. Once new instance of application is successfully deployed, then old instance will be deleted and all the requests will go to the new instance of your application basically. But in recreate, whenever you are redeploying your application will be not available. When you try to access that particular application, you will get 503 server unavailable, right? So these are a few options. Then you have a ingress. So when you are deploying your application in shared space, right, you always get a public endpoint. You will not have a private endpoint basically, right? Then you have a last mile security. So with last mile security, what you can do, so you will get the request on HTTPS, and you will going to forward your request to the application on the HTTPS. So the communication between your ingress and the and your application will be on the protocol HTTPS basically. But right now my application is on HTTP basically. So I am not going to enable the last mile security. If I want to enable the last mile security, my HTTP listener must be the HTTPS, and I have to configure the certificates. Okay, so that is what last mile security means. So I have done everything like this. Then we can set up properties, like if you want to override any properties in your application, or you if you want to define any properties that required by the application, you can set up those properties here. Then here you can set up like what are the packages, like you can define your packages that needs to be logged, and it provide different kind of like info, warning, error, fatal, whatever. So right now I will just ignore all these things. I will deploy the application. Let me check if there's any question. Yeah, it is definitely. I will come to all these questions. So, so let me take by one question in Cloud of 2.0. I will come on this basically. So, Prithvi, I will answer your question so once the application, once the private space will be created, how, yeah, here it's cost. It depend basically it's on basis of replica, how many cores you are allocating to your replica basically, right? It based on the container replica only basically. So basically if you are allocating zero point 0.1 v core, right, to your one replica, and like if you have a multiple replica and you are allocating zero point 0.1 and zero point 0.1, so it will be the zero point 0.2 v cores basically, right? So let me check if my application got deployed or not. So also I let me check few other things. So let me let I have one thing, like when you want to go with a shared space and when you want to go with a private space basically. So shared space, whenever you deploy your application, right, in the shared space, right, it will run in the multi-tenant mode. So what does multi-tenant mode means basically? So with multi-tenant, like whatever is like multi-tenant, the application, like vendor, all the vendor of MuleSoft, all the customers of the MuleSoft will share the same space, like so we just share the same space where all all the customer can deploy the application within the same space. The space will be shared basically. So for example, I have a one space which have a IP range of like 10.1.0.0./24. So it might be possibility the other client can also deploy application within the same space, and you can also deploy the application within the same space. But it doesn't mean your application with share with the other client of the MuleSoft. It doesn't like that, right? It is isolated and it is secure also, right? That so whenever you want to run your application, you are good to run your application in multi-tenant mode, right? In that case, you can definitely go with a shared space. Whenever you want to connect only application which is available over the internet, or maybe like SaaS based application, right? In that case, you can go with a CloudHub 2. Sorry, we can go with a shared space basically, right? Whenever you don't have any requirement of creating custom domain or like a custom certificate, or you don't want to support any mutual authentication basically, or like you don't want to connect any application like where IP whitelisting is required, or maybe like you don't have a requirement of private endpoint. In that case, you can definitely go with a shared space basically. The other thing, whenever you don't have a requirement to connect your corporate data center or maybe private or public cloud, or maybe like any other any on premises data center basically, right? You don't have that particular requirement, right? So you can go with a shared space, because you will not be able to create a VPN connection or transit gateway in your shared space basically, right? That is only possible in the private space. And if you require a private endpoint, that like that is not possible in the shared space. That is only possible in the private space, right? So when you have to go for the private space, so whenever you have a requirement for the custom domain basically, right, you can definitely go with your private space basically. Whenever you want to connect your on premises data center, corporate data center, or maybe any private cloud or public cloud, you can go with your private spaces. Whenever you have a requirement of the custom domains basically, custom certificate, or you have a requirement for the private endpoint, you can go with the private spaces basically, right? So then what are the best practices for the private space? Always create a separate private space for the production and the non-production environment. Always choose the good CIDR block basically, because once you have select the CIDR block, you cannot update that CIDR block basically. Apart from that, so by default, whenever you are creating the VPN connection in the private space, it is by default high available. So you can create a redundant VPN also in by few clicks basically, like so you once you created a VPN, so you can a primary VPN, so you can have a like, or you will get an option where you can create a redundant VPN. So it will automate once you create a redundant VPN, it will override all the setting from the primary VPN basically, right? So those are the things which are provided by your private space basically. Let me check if private space has been done. Okay, it's deploying. Let me check my application. Yeah, so this application has been deployed. So here you got one endpoint. Just carefully observe this endpoint. So here you can see, like in CloudHub 1.0, your application name must be unique across the control plane, basically, right? Across the control plane means if you have given the application name XYZ, the other client, maybe he belongs to other organization, he cannot give the application name XYZ basically. But with the CloudHub 2.0, the name must, it's fine. Like you can also give XYZ name. The other client can also give XYZ name, because MuleSoft automatically add 6-digit unique ID plus a 6-digit SARD basically, and this attach 1, 2, 3, 4, depending on it deployed to the third availability zone in that particular region basically. So it attached 3 here basically. If it's 1, then the availability zone 1. If it's 2, it's availability zone 2. It's 3, availability zone 3, like that. So let me do that test. Yeah, I got the successful response from my application. You can see, like this is the application which I named. The other client can also give this particular application name, because MuleSoft will automatically generate this 6-digit unique ID, then this 6-digit SAR, and this, this is basically it's a basically like depending on the availability zone, it attach 1, 2, or 3. Then we have a region name, then CloudHub.io, and then the test basically, right? Any question? Okay, no question. Let me go back to my. I'm just waiting for my application to get deployed. Not application, my private space. But still I can start explaining the private space. So here you can see this is region. So a region in which you have deployed the application. This is CIDR block. So block, like which we have given when we have configured a private space. So internal DNS, like here, like what does internal DNS means? Like if you want to resolve some IP address and domain. So like my domain, like what happens generally in some of the cases basically, right? You may have some domain basically, like which is same in the production and same in the UAT. For example, I will give api.example.com, right? This is for UAT. Just an example, hypothetical example, example.com. This is for production also, but right. But for UAT, this has to be resolved with one, like I will say something called 200.89.99.77. For production, it must be resolved, like 199.88.77.65. So right. So like in case if you have a separate private space for, for your production and non-production environment, so what you can do uh, in the non-production environment, I can simply say this is my IP address and this has to be resolved. Look, if whenever you see this api.example.com, it has to be resolved with this particular IP address. You can give this multiple IP address. So like on multiple domain, the first thing, the first domain will be resolved with the first IP address. Second domain will be resolved with the second IP address, basically, right? So that's how you can do. It's kind of host file. Like in Windows, we have a etc host file, right? So like here you can, like, you can tell this, but this particular domain has to be resolved with this particular IP address. So like this is what this generally these things happen in the disaster recovery. So let's consider, like, I have a api.example.com for US1, right? And api.example.com for US2, basically. So I will have a two private spaces, like, and this for US1, it has to be resolved with something called 77.88.99.77, just this hypothetical IP address, 44.55.66.77. So like this is my disaster recovery kind of setup. So like this particular first is it's just the active, and second is the passive one, basically. So I have a two private space in for US1, like I can define this particular host and IP mapping, domain and IP mapping, and in other private space I can define this particular IP mapping, basically. So in this case, what will happen whenever it will see api.example.com, it will get resolved to this particular IP address. So it's just, you can define that. Let me go to my, CIDR block, which I've shown you. And this is my public domain, basically. You can see this is my a public domain, a public DNS, basically. Whenever I will deploy my application in the private space, you will see this is the domain name. And this is the internal domain name. Let me copy this. I want to show you something more on this. Okay, so this is the internal public endpoint, and this will be the private endpoint. So these are the two domain, and this is the public domain, and this is the private domain. We have a inbound static IP addresses, and we have a outbound static IP addresses. So basically inbound IP addresses, basically I will tell you. So if I will just go to CMD, and I will say NS lookup. So like if you see it got resolved to, multiple IP address, it will get like 18.1, 89, 200, 3.8, 18.27.57. So it, you can see this same IP address. It should show the three IP address, might be one still not configured. So let's wait. It might be configuring. Okay. So why three IP addresses? Why we don't have a one or two IP addresses? Because one IP address belongs to one availability zone, the second IP address belongs to second availability zone, third IP address belongs to third availability zone. So if you are deploying the if you are creating the private space in region which have a three availability zone, you will see the three inbound static IP addresses. Whenever whenever you are deploying the application private space in the region which have a two availability zone, you will just see the two IP address. Similarly, we have a three outbound IP address which is belong to each availability zone. So what is the outbound static IP address? Anybody is aware of that? So I will tell you. So let I will give one example of CloudHub 1.0. So let consider I have one application which is deployed in the CloudHub 1.0, and that application is connecting to some SFTP location. In that particular SFTP location, basically what we need to do the IP whitelisting, right? So we have to do the IP whitelisting of your MuleSoft application, right? In that case, what we will do? So basically, generally, if you see when the application get redeploy, right, and whenever the application get restart, right, your IP address, your public IP address keep on changing. Basically, it will be dynamically changed, basically, right? Right. So you don't have a control on that. So how can you make sure so you can whitelist the IP address which doesn't change? Basically, in that case you use the static IP address, right? In CloudHub 1.0 we have a mechanism where you can allocate the static IP address to your application, and that static IP address can be whitelisted into the into the end so in destination end, right, at a destination end, basically, or maybe the SFTP vendor, basically, right? So that's how we do it. But here, and let's consider if you have a 10 application and all 10 application has to assign the static IP address, right? It will be difficult. Generally you get a minimum a limited static IP address in the Mule environment of the cloud of 1.0. It's, I think it's in two into number of production vCores, basically. So if you have a two vCores, so you get a static IP address. In case you require more, you may have to connect MuleSoft sales team to get the more static IP. That is possible, right? But here they have changed it. Like, you don't have to allocate a static IP address to each and every application. So instead of that, you can just whitelist these three IP address at your on that particular SFTP location. Basically, like, you consider you deploy one application, which is listening to some SFTP location, and for that particular to listen to that particular SFTP location, you have to whitelist that application. You have to whitelist the IP addresses, basically. So you don't have to allocate this static IP addresses here. You can simply whitelist these three IP addresses, you know, to the to that at that particular SFTP location, basically. So that is the benefit of of this particular private space, basically, right? So you can simply whitelist these three IP addresses. So, but here there's a one issue, like all the application deployed within the private space can access that SFTP location, but which is fine. For example, if you have a on-premises system, right, and you have a one mule runtime, you are going to deploy all the application, right? So basically, if you want to whitelist your on-premises server, so you will going to whitelist the whole server, right? You cannot whitelist one or two applications, basically. That's not possible, right? So same scenario is here, basically, right? So let me check. I haven't got the TLS yet. Let me refresh it. Have it resolved to three IP address now? Not yet. Yeah. So by default, whenever you create a private network, you get domain TLS. So you get a default certificate, basically. So this, like, let me open the view detail. So you get two domains, start.internal dot, which is a private domain, and this is the public domain, basically. But in case if you want a custom domain, basically, what you will do? So first you need to create a TLX context for your custom domain. In this case, what I will do, I will give some name, like let me okay. So let me give dev TLS. Okay, I'll just do that. I will choose the file. I think I should have some certificates available. Yeah, this is dev key store, right? I think the password is MuleSoft, Mule server, right? Then again, key password is MuleSoft, right? And if you want to enable a two-way SSL, so you can add the client certificate here. Basically, you can just create a trust store and add all the client certificate, and you can add it here, basically, right? Add certificate, right? So right now I don't have a client trust store, so I will just say create TRX context. So you can see this API dev domain name.com. So I will upload one more. I will create one more TLX context. So I will just say UAT TLS, and I will Simply say QA. Okay, the password is same. Create TLS context. So here you can see I have created a TLX context for the dev. I created TLX context for the QA. Now I want this particular custom domain. So what I have to do? So in your DNS registry, you need to do some kind of entry. So you need to do the like you need to map the CNAME and the A record basically. So I will just right now this is my public domain. I will copy this public domain. So I will simply say the start dot. This is my I think it is my A record, right? And I have to map to the CNAME, which is this is api dot domain name.com, right? So I have to do this DNS registry basic. Sorry, not this one. To copy this, right? So I have to do this particular entry, and similarly, like I want to do the entry for the QM environment also. So this entry needs to be done in your DNS registry or in your public DNS basically, right? If you want a private domain, then you have to do the entry with this particular URL, like So maybe copy this. So I can just do something like this, and I can say internal hyphen internal hyphen, and here it's let me do that. What is this? Star internal. And this entry can be done in the private registry, a private DNS registry basically, right? So yeah, so this is how you have to set up the DNS basically for your environment basically, right? Let me go back. Right now firewall rule. So basically with CloudHub 2.1.0 you can define only inbound firewall rule. You don't have any capability where you can go and define the outbound firewall rule. You can define up to 80 inbound firewall rule and 80 outbound firewall rule basically. So you can define like what kind of traffic can come in, what kind of traffic can go out basically. So you have a like lot of things like ICMP, HTTPS, UDP, TCP. So you can define that like no, and also you can define like traffic from TCP protocol, it should go publicly or it should go within the private network only, so those kind of firewall rule can be used basically. Then come to environment. So generally I will suggest like always create a separate private space for your production environment and the non-production environment. Here you can say any environment, you can map your private space with all the environment. When you say any environment, you can select the business group here, on which business group or all the business group basically. But I will suggest just create a separate private space for production and non-production. So right now by default I have a sandbox environment in a business group. Then advanced, this is my here you can define how the traffic can be transferred from the ingress load balancer basically. So here redirect to the HTTPS. So whenever the request come on HTTPS, it will redirect your traffic to the HTTPS basically, except HTTP. It will going to accept your HTTP traffic also. Drop HTTP. It will only accept the HTTPS traffic, and it will drop all the HTTP traffic silently basically. You can define your response timeout. By default it's a five minutes, right? In case if the request got timeout at a ingress load balancer, yeah, it will throw 504 error, bad gateway, or like it's bad gateway I think. Then ingress load balancer here in for dedicated load balancer you don't have a capability where you can download the logs, but here you can do that. You can download the logs of your ingress load balancer basically. And also what kind of logs you want to download, you can define it. Like if you want to download for logs for the specific IP address, you can define, you can add those IP addresses basically, so yeah, so let's consider I have one application. So you can find the IP address for that particular application and just add it here, and it will download the logs for that particular application only. Like those kind of capability provided by the private spaces. I don't think like we have a capability available where you can download the dedicated load balancer logs basically, right? Uh, let me check if there's any question. No question. Any question? No, right. Okay. Okay, so this is all about my private space basically. So now what I will do, let me check if my application got, if my private space got created. I will just check. I think it is created now. Let me check why this is not resolving to the three IP addresses. Yeah, now we got the three IP addresses basically, right? And it should match with this basically, right? So now what I will do, I will go to deploy application and I will say mule test to each PS. Okay. So I will this time I will give a PS name, and here it will show the private space also which I created just now, mule sandbox PS, which is private space, and I will just select the same file, and here again you have to define the runtime version, replica size, all those things. And again here, as I mentioned, rolling update with rolling update you can deploy application with zero downtime. With recreate, the application will be unavailable till it get deployed. Okay, so I will just say deploy application. It will take some time. Apart from that, when you deploy the application, you can, if your application have any scheduler, you can see it here. If your application have any object stores, so similar to CloudHub 1.0, you can see it here basically. If there's any object store, you can see the logs. So you can see all the logs, some diagnostic capability also, you can see it here. Okay, and this is the settings of your application. Here if you see, go to ingress, right? So let's wait. Have I deployed in the private space only, right? Yeah. Any question on this, like I really speak, I don't know, is there I haven't read anywhere like there's any limitation on the certificate, right? So I don't think so, Rajamani. So for client certificate, like you have to create a single key, a trust store basically. Let's consider, right? So like if your client one has to support the mutual authentication, or right, a client two has to support the mutual authentication. You need to add the public key or public certificate of both the client into the same trust store. You have to. I think you can upload a single trust store for one TLS context. So you have to add all the certificate in that particular trust store. So maybe you may have to manage that trust store somewhere in the GitHub, or maybe in the some repository basically. Yeah, it's a pain basically, but yeah, we have to do like that. Okay. Yeah, the application is deployed. So you can see like how quickly application get deployed here, right? It's very fast here, because the container is a lightweight as compared to a virtual machine. Yeah, this is my Twitch. Yeah. So still it's, yeah, it's running. And if you see ingress, so I don't know why it's coming like that. So we have a private endpoint also, so you can see it here. Let me refresh it. I don't know why it's coming like that. Yeah, now it looks good. So this is my private endpoint. Let me copy this. I cannot access this, right? I will not, because it has to be accessible within the private space. Basically, I will tell you how we can do that. And this is my public endpoint. So this is the public endpoint, which default public endpoint. If I want to add the public endpoint, which for the custom domain, I can simply say add public endpoint, and here I can select the dev. If it's a dev environment, I will going to select the dev one, and if it's a QA environment, I can select the QA one basically. So that is how we can define the routing. For QA, you can select the QA one. For dev, you can select the dev one basically. But this will not work because I haven't done any domain DNS registry yet. I just uploaded the certificate, but I haven't done any entry basically in the DNS registry, right? So it will not work. So for now, I will use this particular URL. I simply say, right, and I have to add the test. right? Successful response. But so let's consider I have a scenario basically. So I have a system API, I have a process API, I have an experience API. In most of the cases, generally we hide the process API and the system API implementation for the public access, basically, right? In such cases, what you can do, in such cases, you can remove your public endpoint. You can only keep the private endpoint for your application, right? You don't have to keep a public endpoint, right? So that is how you can simply reduce, or you simply restrict your access from publicly, basically, right? So it's as simple as that. You just simply has to remove the private endpoint, like, I'm removing it, this public endpoint. Okay, so I will just copy the private endpoint. I will require this, and I will just say control V, and the test is the endpoint. So I will not able to access this directly from the browser, and I will just apply the changes. So here, like in case of CloudHub 1.0, we have to create a two dedicated load balancer. One is internal and one is for public use, right? So here you can easily do it by just removing the public endpoint. You don't have to create a two private spaces. You just simply remove the public endpoint and just keep the private endpoint. So now I will I will create one simple application, file new Mule project. I will say access private app, app, right? So access private app. I will just simply say finish. I will just use HTTP listener here. Okay. I will configure it. I'll keep setting same. I will simply say private. Then I will use the HTTP requester. In HTTP requester, I will simply give this endpoint. That's it, right? And I will simply, export this. So I'm trying to access the private endpoint. Basically, let's consider this particular access private app is my experience API, and the test app which I deployed, that is my system API, from where I removed the public endpoint. Let me save it. Finish. No, it will not work. I've done some mistake. Okay. So simply what I will do, I will go back. I will say deploy. I will say access private app, right? I will select the file, and let me check ingress. So I have my public endpoint added, and I will keep all the settings as it is. Just deploy it. Not push. So let's wait. I will go. It will not take much time. These both are running. Then private. And that's fine. And let's wait. So that is one of the advantage. So basically, whenever you deploy the application into a private space, you get a public endpoint and you get a private endpoint. You can you can have a multiple public endpoint also. You want two, three, four. You can have those, those number of endpoint also. Yeah, this is just a normal error. So whenever it deploy, it create a Kubernetes container. You can see this particular error. Okay. So I want to access this. Yeah, I got the success response, right? So basically these two applications are available in the same network, right, in the same private space, then it can access the private endpoint basically. But if I try to access from browser, it will not allow to access the private endpoint publicly, right? But this particular application is deployed within the same private space, then it can access it basically, right? So let me go back to private space. Let me see if anything is remaining to explain. Yeah, I have a something like, so we have a something called route table also. So route table generally, like, it's a, you might be read in the AWS, basically it define like, how to route the traffic from the private space out of the private space basically. So here you can see like, by default internet gateway. So with internet gateway, like out, like internet traffic is allowed, like, no, not from internal, like the application deployed to the private space can connect to the internet. If I remove this particular rule, right, the application will not able to connect the SaaS base or application which is available on the internet. And even if you remove this particular route, it will not able to connect your API manager, anypoint MQ, or maybe like most of the platform, anypoint platform services basically. So this rule is required, right? You can add more and more route basically. You can define, and you can define more and more route basically. Basically, like if you don't want to allow all the internet gateway traffic, you can specify the some IP ranges, and you can just add those rule basically. So you need to know like what are the different platform services and their IP addresses range. So those kind of things can be done from here, like route table basically. Yeah, and here you can, as I mentioned, here, like here if I say like HTTPS anywhere, so it means it will allow only HTTPS traffic from anywhere or from the local private network basically, right? So if I add this particular rule, right, so 443 local private network, right, and if I save the changes, so in this case, like, the it will only allow the traffic from the local network. Let's see what happens. I never tried this. Let me try it. It takes some time. Let's see if this it is still accessible. It's not changed yet. Just save change. It taking some time. Okay. See, it's not. I'm not getting the response also, because here what I'm saying, it's like I remove the anyway, right? So it will not allow the HTTPS traffic from the outside. So let me copy this URL somewhere on some other browser. It's coming. It should not come actually. Something is wrong. Okay. So generally, like, I don't know what is happening here. So configure. It is not reflected yet. Any question till it's get applied? Yes, Prabhu, you are right. So basically, like you can do it at a API level, basically, like whether so for API you want a private endpoint or a multiple public endpoint, your single endpoint. So you can define at a API level, like that particular API belongs to Q environment, production environment, or the dev environment, basically, right? So you can do that. Yeah, I think I got some error now. No, 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 something is not right. Not this one. I should not get that. Something is not there, so this rule is still not applied. So HTTPS traffic, I have a rule for this also. I have to, okay, I have a both the rule. I have to delete this one. Save changes. Okay. I think I may need to restart the application for this rule to apply, because it should only allow the traffic, inbound traffic from your HTTPS, right? But that's fine. So generally, like, you can define your HTTPS rule, ICMP, those kind of rules here basically, right? So uh, so you can define all those rules here basically, right? Any question? It should work basically. I'm just thinking. I'm not getting the response. I don't know whether it will work or not. But sometimes, like, applying rule may take up to 30 minutes. Yeah, now it's good. Like, we haven't got the response basically. It's timeout, right? The request has been dropped because I have just removed anywhere from here basically. If I change it to anywhere, it will take some time and it will work basically. Okay. Yeah, it is working. It takes some time for rule to get applied basically. Yeah. So I think I have covered each and everything now for VPN basically. And this is my, I have to cover two more things basically. So, like, when you have a transit gateway, where is my transit gateway going? Not transit gateway, sorry. So generally, as I mentioned, it support, whenever for the network connectivity, support transit gateway and the VPN basically, anypoint VPN, IPsec tunneling. So whenever you want to connect your corporate data center, right, or corporate data center or any on-premises data center, so you can make it a VPN IPsec tunneling, or even you want to connect your Azure cloud or maybe Oracle cloud or Google cloud, you can make it of VPN, IPsec tunneling basically. So you can just use this create connection VPN or transit gateway. You can give some connection name basically and just say next. You can just configure it same way like which we have done in the CloudHub 1.0. If you want to configure transit gateway, like, you can configure the transit gateway here also basically. So basically, if you want to connect the AWS, AWS resources, maybe multiple AWS VPC basically, you can make use of the transit gateway. Even you can, if you want to connect your corporate data center, you can make use of transit gateway. How? So transit gateway, you can create a transit gateway in the AWS. That transit gateway can connect to the all the VPC within the AWS. It can connect to the Azure data center. It can connect to your corporate data center. Then you can create a transit gateway attachment in your CloudHub, and you can connect the transit gateway attachment with the AWS transit gateway. So you don't have to create. You can manage all the connection from the AWS transit gateway, like to the on-premises, to Azure data center, to any other data center or any VPCs, basically, right? So that is all. And from a private space, you can simply attach the transit gateway, basically. So that's how you can, because transit gateway act as a cloud router, right? So then I think I have covered everything. Any question? Let me check. Hi guys, like, I have completed the session. Any question?
I think I saw a couple. I think I see one from Rajami that says, "Hi, Jacky. Is there any limit on the number of client certificates?" I believe you answered this one.
Yeah, I gave the answer for this one. Like, you
Okay.
have to create a single trust store. In that trust store, you can add all the client certificate, and then you can upload that particular trust store, within the TLX domain, TLX context, basically, which I've shown you. Yeah.
Awesome. And then I think the last one is by Prabhu, which says, so mapping rules and internal external API cert segregation in CloudHub 1.0 is handled here at each API level in the ingress settings.
Yes, Prabhu, like here, if you see in the CloudHub 1.0, for for public request and for private request, we are creating the two dedicated load balancer. One can accept all the public traffic, the other can accept all the private traffic. But here you don't have to do that. Here you can do at a API level, like how many public endpoint you require for that particular API. You can configure those. How many private endpoint for that particular API, or even you don't want to have a public endpoint, you can just simply remove the public endpoint. So your API will be not accessible outside your environment or outside your network. So it is handled at a API level. You are right.
Awesome. Well, I think that ends our questions. Jacky, thank you so much. That was a very informative session. Thank you to all of our viewers. And if you missed part of this session, we will be posting it on YouTube, as well as you can find the recording on Twitch and LinkedIn. And with that, I'm going to end this.
And thanks and goodbye. Bye bye. Have a nice day.